Hello, Year 9. So this is going to be a really big question that you can get asked in your paper for your assessment. If this question comes up, I want to make sure that everybody's prepared to the best of their ability. So let's just have a quick look at it. We've got examine the impacts an earthquake on a location that you have studied has had. Okay, examine the impacts of an earthquake on a location that you have studied. Please make sure that you box the word examine, because that's going to ask us to explain in detail these impacts and link it to our theory in some way, as well as linking it to a case study which we've been asked to do at the end. The success criteria for this question that you might want to note down, so you can ask the cover teacher to pause, or if you're watching at home as revision, pause this yourself. The first thing you'll need to do is identify a named location and the year of the earthquake. So Nepal 2015, and you're looking at the Eurasian and the Indian plate boundary that were colliding at a collision plate boundary. Number 2 is you have to explain how the earthquake led to the primary and secondary impacts, thinking about primary impacts like the landslides that were happening directly as a result of the tremors of the earthquake, which hit 7.6 on the Richter scale. And in secondary impacts, we're thinking like the later aftershocks that might have led to an avalanche, because the instability of the mountain of Mount Everest was undermined, and the stability was undermined, and then that would have led to further consequences that we'll look at, which are called the Pease consequences. And then finally, you need to develop on these consequences, talking about the political, economic, environmental, and social ideas that we've got on page 213. Now, just breaking down the question and kind of writing, and once you've written it down, thinking about the words that you see in the question, there's 4 main ideas here that you can take more from, that you can write about straight away, annotating your question. So please do that, do what I've done here, and just draw an arrow away from each word, or underline the word and then draw an arrow away from it, and then put some information down, a couple of key terms that you can remember about the impacts. So if you see the word impact, you should be breaking it down into primary impacts and secondary impacts. Just the examples that we had earlier on, a landslide is a primary impact, an aftershock is a secondary impact that comes later on from the earthquake. So when you see the word impact, you should immediately say to yourself, okay, I know what an impact is, I can say there's 2 types of impacts. Then you can break that down idea further, and you can think, well, what did a landslide, what kind of problems did it create? What kind of problems did the aftershocks lead to later on? So just taking the primary example from a landslide, we could look at the picture and we can say it blocked a lot of roads because the land of the roads slipped down. You can see that very clearly in this image. That meant people couldn't cross those roads. So the consequences of the landslide which the earthquake caused included, and this is not limited to just this information in red, but roads being blocked by landslides. You could go further with this, and you could, which we will do later on, talk about the economic consequences, the political consequences, and so on and so forth. And then it measured 7.6 on the Richter scale and led to many aftershocks. That's just information that you know about the earthquake. It happened in Nepal. Kathmandu was the epicenter of the earthquake, so we know that that's the first point at which the earthquake was felt above the surface and then started to spread its seismic waves out. And then finally, we can link this back to the theory and say that it happened between the Eurasian and the Indian plate boundaries, Indian plate and the Eurasian plate at a collision plate boundary. Now, you can take an impact and you can turn it into Pease consequences. What does P stand for? Take this down if you don't remember. It is political, economic, environmental, and social. Political being to do with the government, economic being to do with money and jobs, environmental being to do with nature and the natural landscape, and social being to do with people's lives, the standard of their living, the things that they need, the quality of life, the things that they kind of want but don't need. And then finally, we're going to start our answer. So using information on page 213, you could write something like what we had earlier on. So I'm just going to take this and we're going to just develop it using Pease a little bit more. So the consequences of the landscape, the landslide caused by the Nepal earthquake in 2015 between the Eurasian and Indian plates led to consequences of many types. such as roads being blocked. So that is our social consequence, people not being able to use those roads. However, this led to problems for the economy, as money had to be spent by the government, by government funding, on this, right? And then as a result, people had less money to spend. So there's a lot of things you could do with just one simple piece of information like the roads being blocked. Okay, feel free to take down that paragraph after you or your cover teacher has paused the video, and then go ahead and start your answer. Please make sure that you use the information on page 213 and that you're practicing this question for your assessment.